May 11th, 1982, Boston, Massachusetts. A man sits in a parked car watching the entrance of a Noni's Pier 4 restaurant. A walkie-talkie rests in his hand. Inside the restaurant, two men finish their meal. One is Brian Balloonhead Halloran, a small-time criminal who made the fatal mistake of speaking to the FBI. The other is Michael Donahue, an innocent father of three with no connection to Boston's underworld. His only crime offering a colleague a ride home on the wrong day. Behind the wheel sits James Whitey Bulger, South Boston's most feared gangster. Disguised with a wig and a fake mustache, he waits patiently, scanning the waterfront. Bulger's trusted lieutenant watches as the two men exit the restaurant and approach a sky-blue Datsun. He raises the walkie-talkie and speaks. The balloon is rising. As the Datsun pulls from the parking lot, he speaks again. The balloon is in the air. The message received, Bulger puts the car in drive. Donahue is killed instantly. Halloran somehow stumbles from the riddled car, but he can't escape. More shots echo across the harbor as Halloran falls to the pavement. The mission is complete. FBI Agent John Connolly sat alone at his desk, the hum of fluorescent lights filling the otherwise silent office. He picked up the phone and dialed a number known to very few. When the line connected, he spoke quietly. "Listen carefully, Whitey. We have a problem. Halloran's cooperating with us about the murder of... You know which one I mean." In the history of American law enforcement, few cases have been as shocking or as devastating as the unholy alliance between the Federal Bureau of Investigation and James Whitey Bulger. What began as a handshake between two boys from the same South Boston neighborhood would grow into decades of corruption, violence, and betrayal, leaving countless innocent lives shattered along the way. South Boston, a neighborhood and a fortress. South Boston, or Southie as locals called it, was more than just a neighborhood. It was a fortress of Irish Catholic working-class life, bound together by loyalty and an unwritten code as strict as any mafia oath. Local shops, churches, and crowded streets created a tight-knit community where everyone knew everyone else. In this environment, two boys were growing up just a few blocks apart. One would become Boston's most feared criminal. The other would rise to the top of the FBI. James Whitey Bulger was 13 when he began building his reputation on the streets. He moved quickly from petty theft to armed robbery, already demonstrating a ruthlessness that would define his life. To young John Connolly, 6 years his junior, Bulger wasn't just a name whispered on street corners. He was a legend, a fearless enforcer who upheld his own code. Protect your own. When Connolly was cornered by older boys, Bulger intervened without question, cementing a bond and a quiet loyalty that would echo for decades. Diverging paths. By the early 1960s, their paths diverged sharply. Bulger was sent to Alcatraz for armed robbery, learning the craft of organized crime among hardened inmates. Connolly pursued law enforcement, graduating from the FBI Academy in 1968. He served in various offices across the country before requesting a transfer back to Boston, driven by a career goal: to take down the Italian mafia, which dominated New England's organized crime scene. Meanwhile, by 1975, Whitey Bulger had transformed himself into a disciplined, calculating criminal. Released from prison 10 years prior, he returned to South Boston, quickly rising through the ranks of the Winter Hill Gang, an Irish crime outfit operating in Boston's shadows. His power, influence, and reputation had grown far beyond the streets of his youth. The first official meeting. In the fall of 1975, a cold wind swept through a quiet South Boston parking lot near Old Harbor. Agent Connolly finally met Bulger officially. The neighborhood boys were now men in their 40s. Connolly pitched the idea. The Italian mafia had been feeding the FBI intelligence on Bulger's crew, and if Bulger didn't act first, he might be next. Bulger listened silently, giving no answer, leaving Connolly in suspense. Days later, a message arrived. One of Bulger's men had been gunned down by the Italian mob. That same day, Connolly's phone rang. Bulger was in. On September 30th, 1975, James Whitey Bulger was entered into the FBI's informant files as BS 1544-TE, top echelon, a designation reserved for the Bureau's most elite sources. What the FBI did not realize, however, was that they hadn't recruited Bulger. Bulger had recruited them. The deal that created a monster. The arrangement immediately showed its dual nature. Within months, Bulger fed intelligence to the FBI about his main rivals, the Anullo brothers, who ran the Patriarca crime family's Boston operations. Every piece of information that damaged the Italians cleared the way for Bulger's own criminal expansion. By 1981, arrests had made headlines nationwide, and the FBI celebrated a major victory. Connolly's career soared. He became a star agent, lauded as the man who had finally cracked Boston's mafia. His supervisor, John Morris, received promotions. Internal memos described Bulger as one of the Bureau's most valuable informants. But behind the headlines, a darker truth unfolded. As the Patriarca family's influence waned, the Winter Hill Gang expanded into the vacuum. Bulger wasn't just an informant, he was building a criminal empire with the FBI's tacit protection, crossing the line. By 1982, the relationship between Connolly, Morris, and Bulger had grown dangerously compromising. They were no longer managing an informant. They were protecting a violent criminal in exchange for intelligence, career advancement, and eventually, cash payments. Connolly and Morris accepted thousands of dollars, knowing that their careers and safety were increasingly tied to Bulger's satisfaction. The case of Brian Halloran revealed the deadly consequences. Halloran, a low-level associate of the Winter Hill Gang, approached federal agents in May 1982, desperate to provide information linking Bulger to the murder of Oklahoma businessman Roger Wheeler. Halloran asked repeatedly for protection. Instead, Connolly handed the intelligence directly to Bulger. Weeks later, Halloran was executed on the Boston waterfront, along with Michael Donahue, a bystander with no criminal ties. The message was clear: betray Bulger and you disappear, whether guilty or innocent. Falsified files and manipulation. Bulger's manipulation extended deep into the FBI. Connolly falsified reports to inflate Bulger's value as an informant, using intelligence gathered from other sources to protect and legitimize his childhood hero. Law enforcement outside the FBI, Massachusetts State Police, the DEA, and other agencies noticed patterns of compromise. Surveillance was discovered, wiretaps compromised, and witnesses intimidated. It became increasingly obvious that Bulger had inside protection. Brutality behind the facade. Bulger's public persona as South Boston's protector masked a terrifying reality. He controlled a massive drug operation, extorted local businesses, and executed anyone who threatened his empire. In 1981, Deborah Davis, girlfriend of Bulger's partner Stephen the Rifleman Flemmi, discovered their informant status. She was strangled to death by Bulger and buried near the Neponset River, her murder concealed for decades. Psychologists later classified Bulger as a sociopath, highly manipulative, devoid of empathy, and extremely dangerous. The fall of law enforcement integrity. As the 1980s progressed, other law enforcement agencies grew frustrated. Massachusetts State Police, the DEA, and uninvolved FBI agents began questioning Bulger's immunity. Connolly, now a supervisor, used his position to continue shielding Bulger, while cash payments allowed him to live beyond his official salary. The line between law enforcement and organized crime had blurred entirely. Media scrutiny and investigative pressure. The first serious external pressure came from the Boston Globe's Spotlight Unit. Investigative reporters began uncovering connections between Bulger and the FBI that went far beyond normal informant relationships. In 1990, a new special agent in charge of the Boston office, unconnected to Connolly, started asking tough questions. John Morris, consumed by guilt, eventually decided to come forward. Confession and collapse. In April 1995, Morris confessed to federal prosecutors and the Boston Globe. He admitted accepting bribes from Bulger, helping protect him, and leaking informant identities that led to multiple murders. The indictment against Bulger, Flemmi, and their associates followed, charging them with extortion, racketeering, and involvement in 19 murders. Connolly made one final fatal error. On December 23, 1994, he tipped Bulger off about a sealed indictment. Bulger disappeared hours before agents arrived to arrest him, taking his longtime girlfriend Catherine Grigg with him. Bulger was officially added to the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list by January 1995. Fugitive years. The manhunt for Bulger spanned continents. Sightings placed him in London, Sicily, Uruguay, and more. Meanwhile, the truth was far simpler. Bulger and Grigg lived quietly in Santa Monica under the aliases Charles and Carol Gasco. They blended in as an elderly couple, entirely unnoticed for 16 years. Victims' families, like the Donahues, continued their fight for justice, enduring decades of pain. The government faced a reckoning. In 2009, a federal judge ruled the FBI responsible for the deaths of Halloran and Donahue, linking the Bureau's corrupt protection of Bulger to their murders. While the court initially awarded $8.2 million, the decision was later overturned due to procedural issues. Connolly's downfall. John Connolly's fall was long and unrelenting. In 2008, he was convicted of second-degree murder for his role in the killing of John Callahan, a victim whose identity Connolly had leaked. He received a 40-year sentence, effectively a life term. By 2011, the FBI doubled the reward for information on Bulger and Grigg, using public campaigns targeting places women of Grigg's age frequented. Capture and justice. On June 22, 2011, the manhunt ended. A former neighbor recognized Grigg and connected her to the elderly Carol Gasco. Bulger was lured to the building garage under the pretense of a break-in. When he emerged, law enforcement apprehended him. On August 12, 2013, a jury convicted Bulger on 31 of 32 counts, including involvement in 11 murders. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms, plus 5 years. Despite his notoriety, Bulger was transferred to several facilities, ultimately arriving at Hazleton Federal Penitentiary in October 2018. Less than 12 hours after arrival, inmates brutally beat him to death, a violent end to a life defined by terror. Legacy and reflection. The real tragedy of the Bulger saga lies not in his death, but in the lives destroyed along the way. The Donahue family waited 37 years for justice. The Davis family waited 19 years for Deborah's remains to be found. Some families never found closure at all. The FBI's deal with Whitey Bulger wasn't merely a bureaucratic misstep. It was a betrayal of public trust, a corruption of justice, and a catalyst for countless deaths. It stands as a stark reminder: the line between law enforcement and criminals must remain clear, because once it blurs, everyone, criminals, protectors, and innocents alike, pays the price.